Okay, the plan for this game is to use a lot of epoxy because this is all the manzanita that I have left that can work. So I'm going to trim this up. So this is going to be the top of the game, starting here, ending here. This is all going to be filled with epoxy. There's going to be live edge. And then this is going to make up the base of the game. It's going to start here and end here. And I'm going to cut it down the middle, flip the pieces around so that the live edge is facing each other, and utilize that to make a river in the middle of the base. And then really I could take the token board from anywhere on this piece of wood. The whole thing is beautiful, but I'm going to take it from starting here, ending here, because I like this portion of the live edge, which hopefully shows up well on camera. So it's going to have, a live edge on the token board, and then just pretty manzanita for the rest. Alright, what Shop Josh just laid out is a hook and ring toss game for an Etsy customer rather than a gift for a friend or relative. The reason that's significant is I only have 2 weeks to complete this game. That sounds like a lot, but woodworking is a hobby for me, so I only have time after work and on weekends to make the game. In addition to that, the customer chose manzanita, which pretty much requires the involvement of epoxy, and the epoxy I use for these little baby rivers takes 3 days to cure. To add on to the time constraint, the order is a Christmas present, so I don't think there's any chance the customer would be happy if I didn't complete it on time. With all of that in mind, I may not have recorded quite as much footage as I normally do. I figured it would be better for this video to suffer than for the game to suffer. Hopefully, both turned out well though. The first step for this game is to get the pieces of manzanita down to their rough dimensions, so that's what I've been doing here. Since I don't care about square or perfectly straight edges at the moment, the bandsaw makes this work super easy. The next step is a really satisfying one, and that's just cleaning up all of the live edge. I do this by chucking up a wire wheel on the lathe and then taking the live edge to the wire wheel. The wire wheel is steel, so it seems like that would be too abrasive, but when using it on hardwoods, it doesn't really remove anything that isn't rotten, so it's perfect for this task. I could follow it up with a less coarse brush of some kind, but for live edge stuff, I really like the texture that it leaves behind. There are some cracks and such that the wire wheel can't get to. For those, I did the best I could with a dental pick and a handheld wire brush to clean them out off camera. Any loose material that I'm unable to access with these methods will negatively affect the bond between the wood and the epoxy, but that will be so deep in a cavity that it really won't cause any issues. The epoxy close to the surface will bond perfectly well to the wood, and the holes are so imperfectly shaped that the epoxy will basically be wedged in once it does cure. Once all of the live edge was cleaned up, I had the daunting task of preparing the boards for epoxy. For the top of the game and the token board, this was really challenging because they both have live edge in addition to the cracks and voids, so I can't just throw them into a mold and pour the epoxy. I won't get into all the minute details, but I basically sealed off all the cracks and voids on the live edge and undersides of the pieces and made little caulking dams around the cracks and voids on tops of the pieces. This way anything that seeps through won't leak out. For the base of the game, I just needed to make a mold. However, for these tiny little games, I don't want to waste a bunch of melamine or something like the YouTubers who make huge expensive tables, so I made a form out of some thin plywood I had laying around and hoped that would be watertight on its own. However, I realized that I could just line it with a garbage bag, and that worked wonderfully. I actually had just barely enough epoxy for that pour. I thought I had plenty because I had 10 ounces to spare in one part of the epoxy, but then when I poured the second part of the epoxy, I was a whole ounce short. Between that and the time constraint, I was extremely concerned that the epoxy wouldn't cure in time or at all. I brought everything indoors and hit it all with a heat gun occasionally to help speed up the process, and as you can see, it actually did cure. Flattening the boards is another really satisfying process. There's not much to say about the flattening process itself though, so I'll take this time to say that if you're like me and don't mind liking videos you enjoy or subscribing to the YouTubers who make them, but also often forget, now would be a great time to do that. Also, if you'd like to place an order for your own hook and ring toss game, chessboard, bottle opener, or ring, feel free to check out my website, which I'll flash on the screen here and place in the description below. With the boards all flat, I still needed the not live edges to be straight and square to the other surfaces. I was considering making a proper L fence, but then I realized that I could just utilize a level as an L fence. If you're not familiar with an L fence, the idea is to basically have an elevated fence for a template to write against. The template is simply a straight edge adhered to the top of my workpiece. The straight edge runs against the fence and the workpiece is cut to match the template. So I clamped the level to the stock fence, stuck a straight edge board on top of my workpieces, and ran them all through to get one straight edge. After that, I could just flip around the base, which has no live edge, and trim off the appropriate amount to have two straight and parallel edges, which are also square to the surfaces. Now that I have straight edges, I simply take all the pieces over to the miter saw to get them down to their final lengths. This next step I actually did while the epoxy was curing, but as far as timing is concerned, the only thing that matters is that you perform this step prior to lining up the top of the game to the bottom. I didn't record myself setting up this little branch holding jig like I normally do, but the idea is to basically make the average center line of the branch be perpendicular to the blade of the miter saw. This way the post doesn't protrude out from the side of the game too much and makes the two sides of the game as fair as can be. The only important thing to mention about the actual miter cuts is sliding the jig across to the other side for the second cut. This ensures that the two ends of the branch are perfectly parallel to each other. If they aren't, then the top of the game won't be parallel to the bottom. The next thing I focused on was the token board. First I drill out the holes for the token itself using a Forstner bit, then I follow that up with a regular drill bit in the pilot holes from the Forstner bit to drill holes which will accept some neodymium magnets. The location of the holes is a little tricky on live edge boards, but I basically just take a bunch of measurements to find the average width, then cut that in half to get my center line, which is the distance from the straight edge. With the holes prepped, it was time to install the magnets. I've yet to come up with a perfect method for this, but here's what I did this time. I masked off the wood with some aluminum tape, drizzled in some black CA glue, then stuck in the magnets. Once the CA glue cured, I drizzled in more CA glue, followed by a spritz of accelerator. I repeated this process until the holes were just barely a little overfilled. In an attempt to reduce the amount of sanding I need to do inside these holes, I used a little template and a flush cutting router bit to remove the excess CA glue and a tiny layer of wood. I think for the next game, I'll insert the magnets from the underside of the board so that there's not a hole in the center of each space to fill with CA glue. That'll make using the template with the router to make the hole for the token a bit tricky, but I have an idea for that which will make more sense when you see it than if I try to explain it now with just words, so keep an eye out for the next hook and ring toss video. The next thing for me to do was to place the post. This step is a combination of measurements and eyeballing. What I do is mark the center lines of the base and then position the branch in a way so that the position of the hooks on the post are in line with those center lines. Once I have the branch positioned, I trace it onto the base so I can easily place it back in that spot for the coming steps. With the outline on the base, I drill a pilot hole through the base in a center-ish position. With that hole drilled through the base, I temporarily attach the post to the base with some double-sided tape, and then I use the pilot hole in the base as a guide to drill the pilot hole in the post. My drill bit isn't quite long enough though, so I then need to remove the base and finish the pilot hole in the post using the hole I was able to drill as a guide. It looks like I didn't record this part, but I also expanded the pilot hole on the underside of the base to accept the head of the screw you see me using here. This hole would be filled with epoxy later. What I'm doing with this screw is attaching the post to the base so that I can align the top of the game to the bottom of the game. Aligning the top of the game to the base involves a modified coping saw blade, a clamp, and some simple math to create some spacers. I've detailed this step in a couple prior videos, but one of these days I think I'll make a short dedicated to explaining this process so I can reference that in these builds. The clamp and the modified coping saw blade made an indentation exactly where I need to drill a hole in the top of the game and the post in order for them both to accept a dowel in the correct position. With those indentations, I can take both the post and the top of the game over to the drill press, place the pilot point on the drill bit in the indentations, and drill away. Now all that's left prior to the glue up is to put a chamfer on most of the non-live edge edges, pop a couple holes for the eye hooks in the underside of the base, finish the live edge surfaces, and do all of the sanding. As per usual, I did not record the sanding process though, so you don't gotta watch that. I do the finish on the live edge surfaces before the rest of the surfaces because finishing the live edges often results in a lot of runs that get onto the main surfaces, and that would just be a pain to finish altogether. So I finish the live edges prior to sanding. This way I can just sand off any finish that did run onto the main surfaces. I only recorded this one coat, but the live edge was pretty dry, so it took 2 to 3 very heavy coats to get it to look nice. That's one thing that I really love about the live edge though. It doesn't really matter how much you apply the poly or how heavily, it pretty much always ends up looking nice without too much fuss. The glue up begins by getting some CA glue on the screw and in the screw hole to prevent any potential creaking during gameplay. Once the CA glue is in place, I start the screw in its hole, get a thin layer of wood glue on the bottom of the post, and screw the post to the base. I'm very careful during this part to have the post rotated correctly to prevent the wood glue from smearing all over the base. That being said though, there's always squeeze out to deal with anyway. To deal with the top of the game, it's just a matter of applying wood glue, inserting a dowel, and clamping it together. You do want to measure from the top to the bottom on both sides and adjust if necessary though, because uneven clamping pressure can cause the top to be not perfectly parallel to the base. To drill the holes for the hooks, I turn the game on its side and use the spacer from the alignment process to make the base of the game parallel to the drill. I then drill a single hole straight through the post. With that hole drilled, I countersink the openings so that there is no chip out when I thread the hooks in. I didn't record this part, but the last thing to do prior to finishing is to fill the hole in the underside of the base with some epoxy and then resand that surface. For the finish, I went with tried and true original finish, which is a true boiled linseed oil and beeswax combination. It's not the toughest finish in the world, but it is super easy to not mess up. It cures quickly enough and it looks really good. Applying it isn't too bad, but after you apply it, you need to wipe off as much as you possibly can, and it's pretty thick, so it's not quickly absorbed by paper towels or even cloth towels, so wiping it off on a surface like this takes a bit of time. Fortunately for you, I just recorded the application. This one isn't my favorite hook and ring toss game, but I do like it and I am happy with how it turned out. I'm even happier that I managed to finish it in time despite dealing with so much epoxy. I didn't get a bunch of pictures for this one, but I did get a couple plus a short little video. Thank you for watching, and please don't hesitate to leave any positive or negative feedback in the comments. Have a good one.